The first story I'll tell you today will be about St. Patrick and Leibon's house. It's a story about how St. Patrick, when he wasn't welcomed at a particular house near Gort in County Galway, how he dealt with the owner of that house and how the effects of it are still there to this very day. St. Patrick, as you know, spent year after year crisscrossing Ireland with his 12 disciples, bringing the good news to places where good news was never heard. And of course, that was exhausting work. Now, this November, cold, miserable day, just as the light was fading, at a place near Gort in the County Galway, they were trembling with the cold, freezing weather, and they came to this dune, this fort. Relief. They could go in, get a bite to eat, maybe a bed for the night. St. Patrick, he gestured to one of his disciples, and of course he had 12 of them, like every good saint had to have 12 disciples at the time, like the good Lord himself. He gestured to one of the disciples, and the disciple, at the door, one of the guards came out above on the balcony and looked down, and the disciple said, "Vag tú istig muid gona hí?" I'll see, said the lad. Jeez, how well he had English. Huh? Isn't it amazing? But he went in anyway, and the feast was going on inside, and Leibon, the chieftain, he didn't like to be disturbed at his eating. He was that kind of a man. Galway man, of course. I love their grub. But he got up anyway and came out. The gate was opened. And the same request was made to him, very humble, by St. Patrick this time. Any chance we could go in for the night, just to throw ourselves down. We are tired. And baptizing is a tough job, you know, tough job. But your man, of course, Christ, he lost the temper entirely. Huh? Do you think we're running a hotel here or something? He said, "Look, there's a fine place out there near the ditch. Go on, shut off out here. Go away. And he said, "If you don't, look, I'll set the dogs on you." And the gate was slammed, leaving St. Patrick and the 12 disciples there to look around them in the darkness now. The light had faded. St. Patrick, he beckoned the disciples back. They pulled back because the dogs now had been released and they were looking around the corners. How well they didn't come any further? They must have sensed something about St. Patrick because, you see, dogs know what human beings don't. You often heard that, don't you? A dog and a horse can sense what a human being can't. But anyway, they were there growling. The wolfhounds, 3 or 4 of them. So St. Patrick pulled the disciples back a respectable, or maybe not a respectable distance. And then he took his crozier in front of him, lifted his mitre 3 times, and then he, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen, and he cursed the house of Leibon, turned around on his heel, and they walked away. That was fine. The feast went on. Leibon, with a few, went to bed. He slept sound, but sometime in the middle of the night, there was this crash like thunder, and the earth ripped open. Leibon and his bed, down they went into this hole in the ground. Of course, the neighbours heard it. They wondered, "Gee, isn't it an awful storm? We never had the likes of this around here before." Oh, they weren't going to get out of their beds. Bed is a grand thing to be in when there's a storm. But they got out in the morning to check it out. And all they saw was this smoke rising from where Leibon's house had been. They came close, and there they saw the hole in the ground where the fort had been the night before. Gone. I tell you, that hole in the ground is still there today. Paul T. Leibon. It isn't called that now, it is called the Punch Bowl, but that's only what the gentry of the 18th century christened it. which is a reflection of their own drinking habits. But the old people all called it Paul D. Liban, from the curse that St. Patrick put on it all those centuries ago when he wasn't welcome there that night by Liban, the chieftain. Now, that was one story about St. Patrick. You were a lot better to welcome that man when he arrived at your door. Another story that proves how unpredictable that man was. He was this night, after a terrible, terrible day's work in County Limerick, East County Limerick, and down in County Tipperary he was, down around Cashel. And again night was falling on him, and he was exhausted. His hand was nearly crippled from all the baptizing. And a cold night, and himself and the disciples, they wanted a little bit of shelter. And they came to this house, fine place entirely. And you'd imagine now that they'd get a little bit of shelter, especially in Cashel, Cashel-Noree, a noble place, and a place that had a reputation for nobility and charity and hospitality. I think the Bode Fáilte of the time had emphasized that. But anyway, they came to this house, and houses were scarce, remember, at the time. And again, one of the disciples went to the door, and out came the chieftain, man with 3 bellies in him. You'd know he was well fed. And God knows he must be a relation of the fella in Galway, when they asked for some place to throw themselves down, and they weren't asking for much. Even a fish to straw in the corner, even though it was a round house. They only asked for a fish to straw in the corner. And again he said, a fish to straw? Aye, we're poor people. Look, there's a thorny hedge out there. Out, go. And he ran him. He didn't threaten the hounds in them, but he ran him. And St. Patrick, all right, he says, done be the will of God. He was a charitable man. But he says, before I go, will he take my blessing? Huh? Blessing? I'll take anything I can get, says your man. So no wonder he had bellies in him. Obviously used to taking. And St. Patrick said, go down there on your knees and I'll give you what I can. Your man did. He was still kind of surprised. And St. Patrick said to him, there and then, may your house be the highest, may your cattle be the whitest, and may your wife be a picture. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. And off he went, leaving your man scratching his head, and of course leaving the disciples disgusted, because if the word of this got around, should that have no respect at all? Huh? Everybody would think that their master was kind of losing his mind a little bit. He was beginning to dote. So on they went, and they came to another house, a smaller house entirely. It didn't look much, but St. Patrick said, knock anyway, the night is beginning to get cold, and your man did. Man came out, and St. Patrick repeated his request, any chance of a place for the night? And your man says, come in, of course, you're welcome. Nice man. And he gave him what he had, bit of a supper. They got the bed. Again, it wasn't great, but he gave them what he had. And when they were going in the morning, they got breakfast. And St. Patrick says, we're thankful to you. Now, I have nothing to give you, he said, but my blessing, will you take it? I'd be delighted, says your man. He was looking at St. Patrick's grey cloak, and he thought, of course, he was some kind of a holy man, a druid, I suppose. But he never had the Christianity, how would he? But he got down on his knees, and St. Patrick blessed him. And he says, may your house be the lowest, may your cattle be the blackest, and may your wife be no picture. And your man was there when St. Patrick and the disciples passed on. Poor man, who was bewildered. And so were the disciples, because if word of this got out, the people, there'd be nobody else baptized. On they went anyway. But shortly after that, this huge storm came one night. And it wasn't before something else happened. Because the first man, he, of course, St. Patrick's blessing. He said to himself, do you know what? My wife a picture. He decided to get married. And because he was a rich man, he could get married to who he liked. And he picked out this local woman who was a lovely looking woman. That's the woman for me, and he married her. But of course, like a lot of fancy women, she wanted, this house isn't good enough for me. She wanted a fine house on a hill. and a fine house that would be seen. And of course he had to build what she wanted. So he built it up on a hill where it would be seen, you know, like a lot of the houses are being built now to be seen nowadays. And so he built for her up on the hill. And there was a lot of cattle around, but she wanted the new ones that were coming in from Europe, white ones, not like the ordinary brown Irish cattle at all. She wanted the new white ones. All right, he had to please his fancy wife, and he bought them for her. Now, she had her lovely white house, and she had her lovely white cattle, and she was a fine-looking woman he had. But anyway, the other man got married too, and of course he hadn't the money to marry a fancy woman. He didn't want to anyway. He was a sensible kind of a man, and he married a local woman who wasn't exactly a picture, but she was sensible. And when he wanted to build her a fancy house above on the hill, no, she says, the house we have down here, I want a house like my father had, and he had a house down in a hollow like this. And when he wanted to buy her some of the white cattle, no. The cattle we had at home, they were fine milking cattle, fine poly black cattle. They're good milkers. So he bought those for her. And a while after that, Jesus, didn't this huge storm come and took the roof off of the house above on the hill and levelled the walls. And a little after that, didn't the O'Briens come out of this very place, Clare? They were noted cattle thieves, and you couldn't hide white cattle from them, of course. Even by night, they stole what white cattle your man had. And of course, his fancy wife, when he had no house and no cattle for her, because cattle, remember, were currency at that time, she didn't see why she should stay with him. And back she went to her own people, leaving him there a broken man with nothing. But the other man, the storm didn't disturb him. It went right over the roof of the house in the hollow. And the black cattle, well, they weren't seen by night. It was easy to hide them. And they had each other. She wasn't a picture, but she had sense. They had each other. And they had their cattle, and they had their house. And of course, St. Patrick's words came true. You should always take notice of a saint's words, because even though they might seem strange, they have a habit of maybe working out in a way that you don't realize. So, St. Patrick, he was a strange man, but